as just to back up, I'm Jason Smith. I'm the director of Northern Manhattan Parks for New York Restoration Project. We're a nonprofit dedicated to ensuring that all New Yorkers have access to well-managed green space, and that looks like different all over the city, but we have community gardens and urban forestry programs, and here in Sherman Creek, Highbridge Park, and the Harlem River Greenway, we support the Parks Department with caring for and restoring these spaces. And it's a fascinating landscape, and I've had the privilege to learn a lot as we try to do that work. So think that's pretty much it, but just a brief overview of our program. Mary's going to share a presentation. It's a little different if you came to the previous two. We're going to have a slightly more abbreviated Q&A as a group, privileging the remote folks because we're going to have the folks who are here in person will have more time to talk and walk together. And then we'll have a short, after Q&A, we'll have a short opportunity for feedback. Again, this is important for us. If you could think a little bit as you're here and listening to Mary, if there's anything that really triggers questions you have that you'd like to explore further, or if it inspires any thoughts about what you might like to do with MRP back at Sherman Creek, let us know. If the ways we've set up for you to let us know don't work, like our Zoom poll last week, just email me or Kyle or come by and visit us. Final note, we're in the Sherman Creek Center right now at capacity, which is awesome. But this is a community resource. And so if you want to use this for a meeting of your own, particularly about something that's focused on parks, green space, community life, we have an application online and you can register to use it. So thank you so much, Mary.
Thanks, Jason. Thank you all for coming. Wow, I'm so impressed by this turnout, and thank you for people who are joining on Zoom. I'm incapable of staying in front of the camera, but know that I'm thinking about you. Happy Valentine's Day. Glad to see you all here. You probably weren't expecting this, but this lecture is a little bit of a love story, because when I went to college, I fell in love with nitrogen. And I sit in my office most days just wanting to talk to people about nitrogen. So this is a great day for me. And Jason, I promise I will try not to make your head hurt, but I might blow your mind. So be on the lookout for that. And then when I went to grad school, I fell in love with salt marshes, which turns out are really important components of the global nitrogen cycle. And also John, but we're here today to talk about salt marshes. My husband John typically today. Before I dive right into talking about marshes and how awesome they are, I want to talk a little bit about my program where I work and how awesome that is. So I teach at SUNY Plattsburgh, which is about as far upstate as you can possibly get in the SUNY system. I do my research in New York City, so why on earth did I move all the way up to Plattsburgh? And it's because we have a really great program for undergraduate and graduate education, which is primarily what I do. We have undergraduate degree programs in geology, ecology, environmental science, environmental planning and management. So we go all the way from hard rock geologists to people who work in local governments with environmental planning. We also have graduate programs in natural resources, earth science education, and all of our geology programs, including earth science education, are licensure qualifying. So if you do earth science, and then you do a year of teaching and you're like, I can't handle this, you will still have all the coursework to become a licensed geologist if you decide to go that route. We are located, for scale, all the way up there. We're right between Lake Champlain and the Adirondack Park, and we take full advantage of all the field opportunities that affords us. We have this thing called the Applied Environmental Science Program, where we have full day field courses. So we go out and spend all day with our students in wetlands doing the kinds of things they would do as wetland professionals, including site delineations. This person's looking at hydric soils, all the way to modeling and data analysis and GIS and things like that. So just want to brag on my program a little bit. Okay, but here's the plan for the science that I'm going to talk about today. So I'm going to give a brief overview of some of the ecosystem services that wetlands provide for us. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the unique challenges that we face trying to manage wetlands in New York City. And a lot of these challenges apply to really most salt marshes on the East Coast of the United States, because it turns out a lot of the East Coast consists of metropolitan areas. So we're really learning a lot here that applies to a lot of different places here and also around the world. I'm going to go through some potential solutions that we've developed to try to maintain our salt marshes in these urban areas, and then we're going to see an example. And then I'm going to talk specifically about some of the work we've been doing here in the Sherman Creek Park with our students. So I'll start with ecosystem services. And I'll preface this by saying that ecosystems do a lot of wetlands do a lot of really cool things that I'm not going to talk about today. Like they protect us from flooding, storm surges. They provide habitat for a lot of really cool species, birds, fish, terrapins. So they provide a lot of really good services for the people who live and work in New York City. The two things I'm going to focus on today, because this is what we were measuring here at Sherman Creek, is carbon storage and removal of nitrogen pollution, so to maintain water quality. All right. And it turns out that wetlands are responsible for storing most of the soil carbon that is stored on the planet, right? So if you look at this map, this is a false color map. I did not make it. I apologize if you're colorblind. This will be the last non-colorblind friendly map. But these little yellow and bright green areas are areas that have the highest amount of carbon storage below ground. And wetlands are somewhat unique because usually if plants grow material, there's something that would like to eat that material. And when they do that, whether it's when the plant is alive or dead, they return all of that carbon back to the atmosphere as CO2. The only way you get long-term storage is if that plant material gets stored below ground. And wetlands are a really good place for doing this, because what do we know about wetlands? What does everybody on this planet know about wetlands? They're covered in water, right? Oxygen's not very soluble in water. So right now, everybody in this room is breaking down organic matter that was once produced by a plant. I had some organic matter in the form of a bagel this morning because I'm in New York City and I have to. I'm breathing the oxygen in the room and I'm breaking down that organic matter. But if it's underwater, the things that would eat that stuff don't have any oxygen to breathe, so they don't break that carbon down, and it just kind of accumulates. And it turns out that wetlands have been doing this for millions of years. A lot of the fossil fuels that we extract are plant material that was buried underground and kept having sediment deposited on top of it. It's exposed to a lot of pressure and weight over time, and it eventually turns into coal. And that carbon would have been stored as part of the rock cycle for billions of years, unless somebody comes along and carves it back out and puts it back into the atmosphere, right? So wetlands store a lot of carbon for us, right? That's a good thing. The other thing they do is they remove various pollutants from the water. And the one I'm going to focus on today is nitrogen, not just because I find this whole thing fascinating and I could study it for the rest of my life and be a happy, happy person, but because nitrogen results in a lot of eutrophication and water quality problems. And when that water comes into wetlands, there are specialized bacteria that can remove that nitrogen back to the atmosphere and help improve our water quality, right? So this whole nitrogen cycle can get very complicated. Two things I want to say about it. One is every little arrow is a cool little microbial process, right? Nitrogen can take so many different forms, and for every form it can take, there's a bacteria that can change it into something else and get some energy out of doing that, which is just cool, right? And the other one is the only real arrows that are pointing out of this thing are associated with this process called denitrification. And that's the one process that we're really going to focus on today. And I discovered in grad school, I had a great professor who now teaches at City College here, Peter Groffman. And he taught me that all of this makes a lot more sense if you think about it from the point of view of a microbe. So I've spent my whole career trying to help people think about this from the point of view of a microbe, because that will help it make your head not hurt when you think about it. So I've started making these series of videos where you dive into a system and talk to a microbe about what it's doing, right? And then you can think about it. So hopefully the people on Zoom will be able to hear this.
Today, we're visiting a wetland to meet a rather remarkable microbe.
Have we started yet?
This is Dee Dee. Dee Dee?
I'm over here.
Oh. This is Dee Dee. Say hi, Dee Dee.
Hi, Dee Dee.
Dee Dee is a bacterium that lives in the rhizosphere, or the area around plant roots. Dee Dee is a heterotroph. That means she eats materials that contain carbon, just like you.
I like plant roots.
I like potatoes.
Yeah, I like potatoes.
Dee Dee also breathes oxygen, just like you. She uses that oxygen to burn the carbon in her food for energy, and she exhales carbon dioxide, just like you. When the soils where she lives become flooded, oxygen runs out. But that's not a problem, because Dee Dee can do something amazing.
Okay.
She can breathe nitrate, a form of nitrogen with oxygen bonded to it.
Oh yeah, I can do that.
And she releases this nitrogen as N2 gas. This process is called denitrification. In urban wetlands, like the one where Dee Dee lives,
I'm from Setauket.
denitrification helps clean the water and remove the nitrogen we add from fertilizers and our poops.
Ew.
Dee Dee is not unique.
Hey.
Lots of bacteria can perform denitrification.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Some even use different processes, but that's a story for another day.
Yeah, this is my story.
So the next time you pass a wetland, think of Dee Dee and her denitrifying friends, and thank them for cleaning up after you.
You're welcome.
Oh. Okay, so that's the idea, right? Some challenges that we face conserving our wetlands in these urban systems. First of all, we've lost over 85% of the historic wetland extent in New York City. For freshwater wetlands, it's close to 90%, right? And the reason for this is just a lot of New York City is built on fill, right? And it's hard to build on a wetland, right? So you'll come in and fill it and then build stuff on top of it, right? And we lost most of our wetlands just to simple urban development. The other thing to keep in mind is you can see on this map, these light green areas are areas that used to be wetland. The dark green areas is what was remaining in 2012, right? All of these light green areas that kind of look like little stream networks, the water that would have flown through the streams is now largely part of our stormwater infrastructure. So that goes down storm drains and ends up in our wastewater treatment. Another problem is that the coastal wetlands that we still have in the city are threatened by a number of things that we're doing on a local scale and on a global scale, right? So on a local scale, one of the things we do is we dredge offshore a lot to allow ships to come and go from our harbors. And that really increases the amount of erosional stress that our remaining wetlands are facing, because instead of hitting the bottom and being dissipated, the waves hit the wetlands with full force and take a lot of those sediments away. Another problem we're facing is that sea levels are rising. By the end of the century globally, we're expecting anywhere from 1 to 4 feet of sea level rise. In New York City, we're expecting somewhere from 2 to 5 feet. So it's even faster than the global rate of sea level rise. When wetlands become flooded too much, eventually the plants just can't breathe underwater for that period of time. And once you lose the plants, there's nothing holding the marsh together and it just kind of erodes away. Possible outcomes for wetlands that are facing these increasing rates of sea level rise is they might just convert to a deep water habitat and you lose the marshes altogether, right? The other thing that can happen is you can leave them space to migrate inland, or they can grow vertically and keep pace with that rate of sea level rise. And that's what we're hoping for in most of the areas that we're working. Marshes can grow vertically 2 ways. One is their above ground growth can trap sediments. So any sediment load that's coming in with the tide or coming in through the streams that we have left gets trapped as it slows down coming through the marsh and settles out and becomes part of the marsh platform. The other way they can grow vertically is by accumulating organic matter, and this is largely dead root material. So the plants grow roots, the plants keep growing, and they basically just grow on top of their own root system, right? And if they don't do this, the symptoms of a marsh that's not keeping pace with sea level rise is something that looks like this, right? You start seeing fracturing, you start seeing ponding further up in the marsh platform, and that's a symptom of a marsh that's not keeping pace with sea level rise. Right? Okay. Another problem is that a lot of the water that's coming into these marsh systems is coming through either wastewater discharge or combined sewage overflows, right? New York City has what's called a combined sewage system. Most of you are probably familiar with this. What this means is in dry weather, everything that you flush down the toilet or pour down the drain ends up in the same underground system of pipes as stuff that goes down storm drains, right? When it's nice and dry and the volume's not too big, all of that goes through wastewater treatment before being discharged. This removes all of the solids. So any sediment that historically would have been coming in via those stream systems is being trapped by this process and not being delivered to the marshes. But it is delivering mostly clean water. A lot of our plants have tertiary treatment, so there's not a ton of nitrogen coming out under dry conditions. Under wet conditions, what happens is the total volume of water is too much for the wastewater treatment systems to be able to handle. So everything, including the stuff going down storm drains, including the stuff that we're flushing down the toilet and pouring down the drain, overflows completely untreated, no treatment whatsoever, directly into our local water. So this has solids, both good and bad, but it also has a lot of dissolved nutrient, right? This is the scale of some of these CSOs. I'm sure you pass by them every day as you go about your daily life. This is one by the Brooklyn Naval Yard. For scale, that's a Chevy Suburban parked right over. So these are pretty big. This is one on the East River. This is one at the Sherman Creek Living Shoreline that we actually crawl over to get from one side of the restoration to the other side of the restoration. And the effect of this is occasionally it's dumping a lot of organic matter and nitrogen into the water, but it's also dumping a lot of stuff that people are just kind of dropping down storm drains. We find some really gross stuff in some of these places when we're out sampling. You have to be really careful where you're putting your hands. This is a big problem. We have over 500 of these outfalls throughout the 5 boroughs of New York City. The scale of these circles indicates how much they discharge in a typical year. So these largest circles represent 2 billion gallons of untreated wastewater per year. And just to orient you and orient the people joining us on Zoom, we're here. So we are right kind of in CSO Central for a lot of these discharge points. And it's a tidal system. So depending on what time of day, you could be getting CSOs from the south, or you could be getting CSO discharge from the north, and it just kind of sloshes back and forth, which is fun to think about. And the net effect of this is there's a lot of nutrient in our wastewater, right? So this fertilizes things that can grow very quickly in the water, like plankton. This is ulva or sea lettuce that's washed up on a shore in Jamaica Bay, and they can form mats really thick. They smell. They're not particularly fun to walk through when you're doing transects. Just a personal note. And the other thing is it's a lot of organic matter. So at nighttime, and when these places are flooded, it consumes a lot of oxygen from the water column, and it can cause low oxygen conditions, which are not great for things like shellfish or fish that need oxygen to survive. The other thing all of this means for marshes is being in an urban system makes it harder for a marsh to grow vertically and keep pace with sea level rise. Because under normal conditions, a lot of those sediments that would have been coming in from streams are being trapped in our wastewater infrastructure. And a lot of nutrients are being dumped during CSO discharges, which makes it harder for plants to grow plant roots. They don't grow as many because they have access to all the nutrient they need. And it can accelerate rates of decomposition. So this dead plant matter doesn't accumulate as much as you would like. And then it also still has all of the problems of higher rates of erosion from offshore dredging and things like that, right? So it's hard to be a marsh in a city. It's a hard life for a marsh. This is a picture of some shoreline erosion at Sherman Creek Park. This was prior to the Living Shoreline installation. And it's in an area where, you know, you have big ships go by and send wakes into the marsh area on a regular basis. And we're starting to see what this is called bank undercutting. So sediment starts washing out from underneath the plant root system. You start to see the trees leaning. And eventually this bank is just going to start collapsing, right? And then, so that's no good. We don't want that. Any questions so far? Okay. I don't think I have time to answer a million, but if anything's unclear at this point, yeah.
I wanted to ask about how the presence of more plant matter, like you talked about with the slides, it suffocates the shellfish somehow, but can you talk a little bit more about how?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So it's plant material. So when it's alive during the day, it's photosynthesizing, releasing oxygen. At nighttime, it's not photosynthesizing and it's just organic material. So things are decomposing it. And all of that decomposition of all of that additional pool of organic matter consumes oxygen, right? So it would be like if I flooded this room, right? We'd start running out of oxygen pretty fast,
Okay, great.
right? And if everybody's breathing very heavily, we're going to run out of oxygen even faster. Right? That's kind of the idea. That's a horrible example, but that's kind of the idea. Right. Okay, well then it was effective.
But in the long run, it gives off carbon dioxide.
Yeah, that's the other thing is all of that respiration is releasing CO2 as well. And that can actually cause nighttime acidification in the water as well, which is not great. So lots of problems. Okay, so let's say we don't want our park to fall into the Harlem River. What can we do about it, right? And there are kind of two broad categories of solutions. Historically, what we would have done is some kind of gray infrastructure solution. You build a bulkhead, you build a seawall, you build an offshore jetty, something like that to deal with the actual physical forces in the system. The problem with that is that concrete is not, it's not removing nitrogen, it's not storing carbon, it's not providing habitat for any species, it's not providing any of those services. So the other category is some kind of green infrastructure solution where you either conserve, restore, or create systems that provide these services or try to integrate some aspects of those systems into the gray infrastructure that you're building, right? So in reality, a lot of the things that we're doing in the city involve components of both of these, right? We're building green and gray infrastructure in the same place. And if you look at these photographs, this is a picture on the west shore of Manhattan. This is around Little Island, and this is the Gansevoort Salt Marsh reconstruction. Both of these examples involve gray and green infrastructure to recoup some of those services. Right.
Oh, I thought it was just, I was on a boat cruise and I was admiring it, but I have no idea what it's for. But it just looks so good.
Yeah.
But now I know why.
Well, yeah, I mean, aesthetic services are also ecosystem services. We like to look at things that are pretty. It makes us feel better. It improves our mental health, right? So all of those are ecosystem services as well. Absolutely. Okay, so this is a map of a bunch of coastal restorations that New York City parks has done 1993 to 2015. And this doesn't even include some of the larger scale restorations that have occurred in Jamaica Bay, which is part of the National Park Service Gateway National Recreation Area, right? So we have a lot of these examples that we can use to kind of test what works, what doesn't, and how much of these services do we reclaim when we successfully restore these areas. Do they behave the way you would expect a natural marsh to behave, which is really interesting, right?
Excuse me, what's the
Yeah.
red dot next to Swindler's Cove?
That's where we are. That's the
Oh, that
Sherman
means
Creek
we're here.
restoration.
Okay.
Yeah, you are here.
Swindler's Cove.
To remind me also where I am. Saturday morning, right? Right. So the steps to successfully restore or create a wetland that we know of so far is, first of all, you have to establish elevation. You want to make it high enough that things are able to survive. They're not being drowned, right? If you build it too low, plant roots are not going to be able to breathe. The plants are not going to be able to grow. You're not going to get a marsh. If you build it too high, you're not going to get a wetland. You're going to get something terrestrial that doesn't provide those same ecosystem services. So you have to get that elevation right.
What's going on in that picture?
Yes. So this is, I was going to talk about that. Thank you for reminding me. So this is what's called a thin layer placement. So this was the restoration that occurred at Big Egg Marsh in Jamaica Bay back in 2003. So what they did is they had a swing ladder dredge, and they dredged sand from the channel, and they just sprayed it over the surface of the marsh to add just a little bit of sediment to help the marsh keep up. And this is a really common restoration technique. You don't always get to spray it like this. This looks very dramatic. Often it's just kind of like spreading and shoveling. Or you can go much bigger and actually bring in a lot of dredge if you need a lot more elevation, and then grade it to the desired level you want. And this is a picture from the Yellow Bar restoration back in 2012 in Jamaica Bay. It's one of these larger scale. Okay.
That's what's happening up in the Rockaway area? Because I'm from Far Rockaway, so, but I know they're really building up the shoreline.
It could be. I can't comment on that specific area.
Beach 7, the whole stretch, beach 7, beach 9, all the way down, going up into the 80s. Yeah, they're doing a lot of work on the shorefront.
Possibly. It could also just be a beach replenishment. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
without
so
knowing more.
It's a lot of work, and I know they're securing the area where the birds nest.
Yeah.
That I know for sure. They're really particularly paying attention to
Oh
that.
yeah. You got to be careful of the birds. They did one of those close to an area that we'd been sampling, and we had to move to a different area where we weren't be sampling. Once you get that elevation where you want it, you have to maintain the elevation. And the best way to do this is to get the plants to take off. Once the plants take off, they establish root systems. They're going to keep that sediment in place pretty effectively, right? Sometimes they need a little help. So in the case of Sherman Creek, you're in a really high erosion area. You can incorporate some more natural and also artificial things to help keep that sediment in place until the plant community can take off. So in this example, I believe Dr. Zarnock talked a bit about the oyster castles last week. In addition to providing habitat for shellfish, they also help dissipate wave energy before it hits the marsh. So that can help with erosion. You can also do things like core logs, which are natural nets that you put oyster shells and stuff in, and put them there to try to keep the sediment in place. And then at this site, we also use coconut fiber mats. So putting those down to keep the sediment in place, and then planting right over the top of that, right? So things like that can help maintain elevation until the marsh takes off, right? And then finally, you want to make sure that you're actually restoring services, which is what my colleagues and I primarily focused on. So once you have something that looks like a marsh, right? I see grass. That's good. That's positive. Is it actually doing all the services that we would like to see it doing, right? So we'll go out and actually measure and see, are you removing nitrogen like we would expect a marsh to do, right? So one of the methods we use to quantify these removal processes is something called a continuous flow incubation. So we'll go out with a coring device and pull out little representative cores from different areas. And if we have different treatments, we can get different cores from different treatments. If we have different sites we want to compare, like the marsh versus the mudflat versus the riprap, we can sample those. And then we plug it so that it's gas tight. We pipe site water into it, and we collect what comes out the other end. So we can measure nutrient removal, and importantly, we can measure the rate of nitrogen gas production. So we can actually directly measure that rate of denitrification, or how much nitrogen is being removed permanently back to the atmosphere. And we've been doing this for a while, for a lot of different restored marshes. And one of the things that we've seen kind of across the board is that plants are essential for facilitating this nitrogen removal. If you establish a vegetated marsh relative to a mudflat, you can double or triple rates of nitrogen removal for these restored marshes. And in a lot of cases, it's the difference between a marsh removing nitrogen or actually contributing more nitrogen to the water column, if you can get a marsh to grow there, right? But one of the things we're still interested in is, what about everything else that's not a plant growing in the marsh, right? So we've done some work trying to restore ribbed mussels, which are little bivalves that grow in and amongst the salt marsh plants. And they're kind of a textbook case of what we call a facultative mutualism, which is two species that help each other grow and reproduce better. They don't need each other to survive, but they do better when they grow together with each other, right? And what the mussels do for the plants is, these mussels are suspension feeders. So they're pulling material out of the water column and they're pooping on the marsh surface. So they help take the nitrogen out of the water column and give it to the plants, so the plants can use it to grow. And they also grow these little things called byssal threads that they use to attach to the surface, and that can help stabilize sediments as well. And then what the plants do for the mussels is they give them a habitat to settle. So just like sediment can settle out when it comes into the marsh, these guys have babies or larvae that swim around in the water column and then settle and turn into adults. So these plants give them a place to settle. It kind of slows the water down and lets them settle out and metamorphose. And it provides a canopy. So it kind of gives them a little beach umbrella that they can hide under, and they don't dry out as fast. Yeah.
I have one more question to ask about where things belong. So why
Okay.
do you want nitrogen to be in the air, or do we want it to come out? I mean, I know most of the atmosphere is nitrogen, but talking about the process of denitrification,
Yeah.
like, where is the nitrogen supposed to be ideal?
Yeah. If we're worried about eutrophication, we want to get the nitrogen out of the water.
Okay.
And back into the atmosphere.
Got it.
So what these guys do, they take the nitrogen out of the water column, they put it on the marsh surface where plants can get it and where microbes can get it. And plants use it to grow, and microbes can do denitrification and put that nitrogen back in the air.
Got it.
So then it's gone. We don't have to worry about it anymore.
Thank you.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So some other work has shown that this mutualism can be helpful to marshes when they're faced with sea level rise. Because what happens is this: you have the water level above the sediment surface. If you add, I got this, got to hit the right arrow. If you add mussels, what they can do is they can enhance plant growth. And if you have more above ground biomass, those plants are going to capture more sediment that's coming in from the water, which can result in vertical growth of the marsh because they're able to trap more sediment, right? And this can result in a reinforced mutualism because it keeps the habitat there for the mussels, right? This has been shown for a whole bunch of natural marshes and these kind of like large natural estuarine reserves. Hasn't been tested quite as much in urban systems, right? The other thing that can happen is mussels can help facilitate that nitrogen removal process. So in addition to helping the plants grow, they can also contribute a whole bunch of organic matter, including ammonium, to the sediment. So again, they're suspension feeding. They're pooping out on the surface of the marsh, right? They're transferring that stuff down to the sediment. Plants aerate the area around their roots. That nitrogen can be turned into nitrate. And then once it's in the form of nitrate, our little denitrifying bacteria can remove that nitrogen back to the atmosphere as nitrogen gas. So we generally expect if we add mussels, we should get higher rates of denitrification and higher rates of nitrogen removal in these systems. So that's one of the things we wanted to look at. Okay. So now I'm going to talk specifically about Sherman Creek and how we tested some of these things here. And before I do that, I should mention that this is a very large collaborative project that I came into actually relatively late. So a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about is stuff that Jason and his colleagues and my colleagues at CUNY, Baruch College, had been working on. And then my graduate student, Shannon Cooper, kind of helped put all these data together that we've been collecting back since 2019 and kind of figured out what we learned from all of these things that we've been measuring. So shout out to all my collaborators. So again, we're here. This is a 5-acre living shoreline within a 15-acre park. So it's a really large marsh restoration for a place outside Jamaica Bay. Like in Manhattan, this is a lot of marsh. And they've been trying to get it to take off for a while, since before I was even in college, right? So DEC first started trying to establish a marsh here back in the late 90s. And the two main problems were erosion from the Harlem River and these little jerks, Canada geese. When you first plant plants, it's very common for Canada geese to just waddle right up into your marsh restoration and pull them out by the roots before they have a chance to grow, right? So because of most of these, we had lost a lot of that original restoration that had occurred. So the goal going into this project was to fix the erosion problem by installing those, the artificial oyster reef or the oyster castles, the fiber mats, the core logs, all of those things that I showed you to try to help maintain elevation at Sherman Creek. And when I came onto this project, that part had largely been accomplished already and working pretty well, right? So what we wanted to look at is, could we develop an effective method for excluding those nuisance herbivores? Could we attempt installation of ribbed mussels here? And also quantifying those nutrient removal services, right? So the first thing that my colleagues at Baruch College did back in 2019 was do some pre-restoration surveys. So prior to the installation of the new Living Shoreline, they went out and sampled the habitats that already existed at Sherman Creek. Because we're establishing marsh, which ostensibly should be a good thing, but we want to make sure that it's actually adding value relative to the other kinds of habitats that are already there. So, you know, if we establish a marsh as opposed to mudflat or riprap, is it actually removing more nitrogen? Is it actually storing more carbon, right? So it gives us a baseline.
Riprap?
Oh, riprap is kind of like a whole bunch of rocks and cinder blocks and things that you just kind of put along the shoreline to stabilize. So it's more on the gray infrastructure side of things. Rubble, yeah, construction materials, yeah. Okay, and we had a little bit of existing marsh that was still left over from that initial restoration that was about 20 years old when we did this. So we had sort of a reference marsh to compare everything against as well. Okay. So what we did is we did a core incubation. We went out and collected cores from all of these different kinds of habitats. We measured the plant material. We characterized the sediments. So we measured carbon content of the sediments. Oops. This is how we measured the gas removal using this fun mass spec. I put googly eyes on everything just so I can make eye contact with my instruments, make sure they're behaving. And we had these little gas tight samples from inflows and outflows. You measure the nitrogen gas content of these, and you can see how much nitrogen gas is being produced by these different kinds of habitats, and that gives you a nitrogen removal rate. Okay. We did this post-restoration in 2020, so after the Living Shoreline had been established, and we did all of the same measurements at mudflat, riprap, and the existing marsh, but we also sampled the new marsh as well to see how it compared. In 2021, this is when we tried our mussel addition experiment. So for this, we collected a whole bunch of mussels from a deteriorating marsh in Jamaica Bay, black bank marsh, which if you go to the nature center, it's the one that's falling off the side of the nature center. We collected those mussels and we set up replicate plots. So we had these 1/4 meter square plots, and we put 400 mussels in each one of them, which is kind of the natural density you'd expect to see in a marsh. And this wasn't easy, right? Relative to all the other places we've done mussel additions, trying to plant mussels in these coconut fiber mats, not easy. It took a really long time. And then after we had done it, these little guys showed up and just ate all of them.
Oh.
Just like went to town, said, thank you very much for the seafood buffet. We're gonna eat your entire experiment. So, and the other thing that happened is these guys popped out of nowhere and devegetated our marshes.
No.
It was a rough year. So what we did, yeah, the animals were having a ball. They were like, this is great. Are we doing this every year? So we went back out, and my colleagues in the city, I was not involved in this part, replanted all of the mussels again and built little cages around them. It did not stop the raccoons.
Oh.
They burrowed under the cages. In some cases, they actually took the cages apart with their creepy little raccoon bug. It turns out raccoons are better at taking cages apart than we are at putting them together. Fingers. And we can see them. They left their little paw prints all up in our plots and all around. You can see their little baby hands next to the adult hands. So they're teaching their children to eat our experiments, right? This is an unsolved problem. But the good thing that came out of it was that these cages were the only places that we saw really robust plant growth that year. So what we did is we had plant and no plant treatments from the new marsh, where we had protected the plants versus not. And then we still extracted cores, and for our mussel treatments, we just threw 3 mussels in at the last minute and ran our incubation. I feel like if we could get mussels here, would they give us any added value, right? That was the idea. Okay, so in 2022, because we had this successful plant growth, Jason and his colleagues were able to make the case for increasing exclusion to do a better job of keeping the geese out. So we went from kind of this wooden pole and string to more of a more robust construction fence around, especially along the waterfront, because that's primarily where the geese are coming in, but also string across the top to keep them from landing in there. And this was very successful in keeping the geese out. So this is when we finally had pictures that look like this that we could take to conferences and presentations. Doesn't it look beautiful, right? So in 2023, we went back and did our survey again and measured nitrogen removal, plant material, sediment characteristics at the riprap, the mudflat, the existing marsh that's about 20 years old, and the new marsh that we finally kept the geese out of for a while, right? And what we found, water, getting all keyed up. What we found that was really exciting is once we installed this new robust exclusion fencing, the new marsh So this graph is showing the existing marsh in these little blue circles. These are two different measurements of growth. The new marsh is in the green circles. So once we installed this fencing, the new marsh started looking a heck of a lot like the existing marsh within 1 year, right? And this was true for every variable we measured: height, density, biomass, all of that. The only place where the new marsh is lagging behind is the below ground, the root biomass, which takes a while to build up. So we were expecting that. Right. Okay. We also measured how much carbon these different habitats were storing. So the total amount of organic matter in the sediments of these different habitats. And again, what we found is what we were expecting. The existing marsh, the marsh that had been there for 20 years, had the most carbon below ground. That makes sense. It's been accumulating root material. The roots have been leaking carbon and decomposing. That makes sense, right? But the thing we weren't expecting is organic matter is pretty high across the board relative to a lot of restored sites. So it is typically around 2 to 3%. In other newly restored sites, like in Jamaica Bay, it'd be around like 0.1 to 0.3%. So it's pretty organic soils in general.
What does it look like in like steady state long-term marshes? Like, is it around 10% like this existing marsh, or is it higher?
It can get pretty high.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is still, to me, looking like a restored marsh, but just like an older restored marsh.
Yeah.
Yeah. If we look at total carbon storage, so this graph is showing the total amount of carbon content in kilograms of carbon per meter squared in these different habitat types. Orange is showing storage in the sediments, blue in the below ground plant mass, so the roots, and green in the above ground plant biomass. Again, we see the existing marsh is storing the most carbon. That makes sense. The new marsh is in fact storing a lot more carbon than the other habitat types, which we were also expecting, but again, it's good to have evidence for these things. And if you assign an economic value to this, which people like to do sometimes, I can go either way, but if you want to do that, this newly restored site is providing about $480 per hectare in carbon storage services. Not a lot. Yeah, so what I hesitated to even bring this up, but people find it interesting. So it's on, like, if you have a carbon trading market, and right now a typical market value is like $40 per pound. It's the amount of value of taking that carbon out of the atmosphere and storing it, if you have like a carbon trading scheme. That's all. Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
Yeah. For me, the value of the nitrogen removal makes a little bit more sense, and it's also a much higher value. So I'll get into that in a second. Yeah.
Before you get off the last slide, sorry. I'm just very curious with the riprap. It seems like the sediment there is as good functionally as like the existing marsh.
It's a density thing. So to get carbon per meter squared, those are a lot more dense because they're a lot more compact. So like in the top 5 centimeters, it's more dense. So there's more like total mass of carbon. Marsh sediments tend to be floppy, so they have a lower density. The carbon is also likely going a lot deeper down into the sediment. We only measured the top 5 centimeters. So it's a density thing. Yeah. This is the nitrogen removal services. So again, mudflat and riprap are orange and yellow. The existing marsh is blue and the new marsh is green. So the first thing we found is marshes are removing more nitrogen than the other habitat types that don't have marsh in them, right? Mudflats and riprap. Again, that's what we were expecting because of the plants, because of the carbon, because of the aeration, all of the things that plants do that make it a better place to be a microbe that's removing nitrogen. What surprised us and is really encouraging is that anytime we get the new marsh to grow effectively, it removes just as much nitrogen as the existing marsh that's been there for 20 years.
Mm.
And the reason that's surprising is because the existing marsh has so much more carbon, so much more below ground biomass. And we typically think of these processes as things that take a long time to develop. But what we showed here is if you can get this marsh to take off in Sherman Creek in this case, you can remove as much nitrogen within a year as you can, right? So it happens quickly, which is cool.
What was in the pudding?
Yeah, it is exciting. I didn't see that coming. And in terms of value, the way we calculate value for this is basically stormwater treatment. So we calculate value as the replacement value, like what would you need to do in terms of gray infrastructure to remove the same amount of nitrogen. It can be anything from increasing the capacity of your wastewater treatment plant to building rain gardens to redoing the infrastructure to have separated systems, right? So the value is really wide. But the takeaway here is these other systems in some cases are resulting in a net loss in terms of nitrogen removal. And these marshes are providing anywhere from 400 to 3,600 per year in terms of nitrogen removal services. Yeah.
Can you talk about why mud flats are like kind of adding nitrogen to the water?
Yeah, a lot of mud flats, the thing about mud flats is they're kind of permanently inundated, or they're inundated for a long period of time. In a lot of cases, they still have that organic matter, but there's not a lot of oxygen getting down there. So what happens instead is instead of having, you know, your denitrifying bacteria that can use that form of nitrogen with oxygen stuck to it, the nitrogen just kind of gets stuck in a reduced form. And all of that organic material that's still there is still going to get decomposed. So instead of being removed, it just gets recycled back into the system.
This is like hanging out in water.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you have stuff that has accumulated and it gets drowned, it's going to start being released into the water.
The more stuff that accumulates, the worse the issue gets for mud flats with nitrogen.
Could be, yeah. So like if you have a marsh that's fracturing and falling off into the bay, all that organic matter is going to decompose and contribute nitrogen to the water that otherwise would have been stored in biomass or removed to the atmosphere. So yeah. Okay, and results from our mussel experiment where we just at the last minute threw some mussels in and said, show us what you can do. They can increase denitrification by about 50%. Right, so if we could get mussels to establish here, we could increase that value by about 50%. So far, the raccoons don't think that's a good idea, and they're the strongest lobbying organization in Sherman Creek Park. So, yeah, those guys are kind of keeping that from happening. Yeah.
Did you introduce mussels in the existing marsh and the new marsh?
Just the new marsh. Yeah, just the restored area.
Are there mussels in the existing marsh?
We haven't found any. What? They might have. Yeah. So in terms of our project objectives, we did develop effective methods for excluding nuisance herbivores. So we were able to get the plants to grow effectively and keep the geese out. I'm giving us a check minus on the attempt mussel restoration. We sure attempted the hell out of it, but we didn't get any mussels to actually grow there. And then quantify nutrient removal services. We found out these restored marshes can provide services within a year if we can just get them up and running, right? So in summary, the project enhanced nitrogen removal. It taught us valuable lessons about what we call biotic constraints, which is a fancy word for raccoons keep eating all of our mussels and keeping the geese out. And then we really found that adaptive management is important. So being able to monitor, take your monitoring data back to the managers on the ground who are actually implementing the restoration strategies and having that relationship where you can kind of have a back and forth and say, this is what we're seeing. Maybe we can try this. It was really valuable for getting this site to work. Right. So with that, I'll take any questions. And the results of this study that my student wrote up are published. So if you want to take a look at this, the paper is available.
Well, could we pause maybe? Maybe you could ask one question and then Kyle, could you start monitoring the chat? I don't want online folks to be talking. So while Kyle's pulling it out.
Yes. I have a question about the
Yeah.
the dredging just to restore elevation. Isn't that kind of like giving and taking away? I mean, isn't dredging causing some of the erosion problem?
Yeah. Some of it's brought in locally, some of it is brought in from outside areas where they're having to dredge anyways. Whether it's to maintain active harbors, like a lot of sand is removed from harbors every year. You can take it to a landfill or you can use it to do marsh restoration. So that's the idea. Yeah.
What would you technically count as a sediment? And are there any like useful examples of maybe other coastal cities being able to remove those like sediments from like their waste management and being able to put it back into the shores?
Good question. Yeah, the sediment is just basically mineral soil that's coming in. In these systems, it's usually sand, right? But if it's coming in from a stream, if it's coming from Long Island, it's still sand. If it's not, it could have some actual soil in it that has organic material. But either way, if you're removing solids and wastewater treatment, all of it usually ends up either being incinerated or going to a landfill. Could you remove it post incineration? I don't know. There's probably a lot of other really gross stuff in there that you wouldn't want to be spreading on the surface of your restored marsh. Yeah, it's a good question. Do you want to?
Kyle, could you pull up a couple from the chat?
Yeah, one question. What are some anti-geese and raccoon countermeasures that can be put in place if there is any?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. And when my student gave this talk in Plattsburgh, people started asking about, could you play like sounds of gunshots to keep the geese away? Like in an agricultural area, you can do stuff like that. You can use noise deterrent. You're a little restricted in an urban system about methods that you can use to deter geese. You probably wouldn't want to play the sounds of gunshots in the middle of a residential area to scare the geese away. And it turns out the geese kind of get wise to it anyways, and it doesn't really bother them anymore. People also use like brightly colored flagging and stuff. They get used to that as well. It's really just the physical restraint to keep the geese from entering the area, especially if you're working along a shoreline where they can just swim up onto the shore and just waddle their way right in there. The hope is once the marsh has been growing for a few years, it'll form a rhizome mat and the plants will resist being pulled out by their roots. And at that point, the geese can just kind of graze on them and the plants will grow right back up.
You couldn't use dogs, right? As they do on Governor's Island, they have dogs.
Oh yeah.
But you can't do that now because
probably
in the water.
Probably not here. But yeah, that's another method that's used is you can use dogs to scare the geese away.
I would just say one more thing about raccoon management that we didn't touch on. It's because we have a lot of garbage sitting out in containers. So when we have policy ideas like to keep our garbage in containers instead of bags on the street, that has all these other benefits to like our wetlands that we don't think about.
Yeah. The speaker last week mentioned that maybe raccoons don't like to like wade through the tall grass. Do you have any anecdotes to that or not?
So yeah, I mean that's a hypothesis.
Yeah.
They're pretty determined. I mean, we went out and took some follow-up photos a couple of years ago, and we were definitely seeing the paw prints inside where so maybe if you have a larger area, they won't go very deep into the grass, but they're definitely still nibbling around. Yeah. Yeah.
Let me share one more from the chat, then we go back here. Was the existing marsh a good example of functional, healthy ecosystem? And how did it compare to more established marshes?
Oh, that's a good question. It was the best reference we have. In a lot of cases, you don't really have a reference at all because you're building a marsh where there's just nothing left in the area. So that was the best one we have. How does it compare to other marshes? I'd say the rates were pretty similar to what we've seen in other natural marshes in the region. It's hard because it varies a lot year to year. That's why it's so important to have a reference, some kind of reference nearby so that you can see the effect of what you're doing relative to something. And we rarely have a perfect reference.
And another one is, how do salt marshes rhizome systems spread?
How do they spread?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's a good question. So Spartina alterniflora is a clonal species that also sets seed. So what that means is they have these underground stems called rhizomes that can grow laterally, and they just all kind of sprout from the same stem. But they also reproduce sexually by seed. So they are wind dispersed seed. So those are two different ways that they can spread.
So they're all connected then, if it dies off of one part, will it die off the whole part, or it puts down separate stuff? So like if it's long and it's part of one organism?
No, it's usually more like if it dies off in one area, the rhizomes will just kind of recolonize that little area where you had die off, usually. Yeah.
In terms of adaptive management, what would you recommend for, like, say, if you did not have the extensive resources or scientists or people studying and have to create recommendations? How would you, like, are there any like basic tests that on the management side people can do to kind of understand what's happening in the market?
Yeah, so I'd say, first of all, you can tell a lot by how the plants are doing. And I know a lot of the stuff that Jason and his team were doing was just going out and doing photo surveys. So
yeah, and I think like we were really lucky to have the resources to do this in-depth work, but the most important thing I think is to have, like, Edward Santos is the park manager, and like a lot of this work he's there, right? And he's there every day, so the geese will still break in.
And you have to go fix it.
We'll go fix it.
Yeah.
I think we spend a lot of money on this stuff sometimes, not necessarily MRP, but just like people. But really, like, what we need is just the people that are caring for the land to have the knowledge. And it's not like high tech knowledge. It's like knowledge of what does a Spartina marsh look like and where would it be in the landscape. And then like it's not, and so what we don't have is that kind of like, we don't care for the land. So that's kind of like, I think, unfortunately, because of the way we make decisions and stuff, it all gets very expensive fairly quickly, but it really doesn't happen.
I'd say that's true of restoration across the board as well. It's often easier to get that big investment to do a project than it is to just get a few thousand a year to send somebody out and go check on it and do the maintenance that you need. Yeah. Any more from the chat?
Yes. I'm going to put here. I don't know if it helps.
Maybe we could just do one more question from the chat, and then we're going to take a short break, and I'll let everyone know what the next steps are.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Let's see. This one here, Makali.
Okay.
You mentioned briefly New York City development on field. Have you had opportunities to compare notes with colleagues working on wetland restoration in other urbanized and coastal cities like Dakar, Conakry, Abidjan? I'm curious whether the urbanization patterns there, informal settlements, different infrastructure approaches, create hydrological challenges that differ significantly from what you see in New York City.
Oh, that would be a nature paper. So the short answer is no. Yeah. The best opportunity to do that would probably be some kind of international restoration conference, which they do have. Macaulay, if you have any suggestions for people that I could talk to, I'd love to do something.
Yeah,
like that.
for context, I,
Connect you guys.
yeah, he can connect you.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, and Jason, I think there is one question that you could answer. It's about message for young people in the neighborhood about why this project is so important. What is our responsibility at an individual level?
Mhm.
How do you answer that?
I mean, I guess I think we kind of all have to answer that for ourselves. But yeah, I mean, I think we should all think about our responsibility to take care of the place we live. And it actually can be really fun. For young people, I can't answer. My daughter is 15 and she prefers to not go into wetlands. Well, we've got some kids here. So.
Honestly, I don't mind.
I think it also comes down to just education, understanding, you know, because a lot of people don't understand what's all around them, so sure. And with less exposure to it over time, you get less opportunities to understand it, to relate to it.
Do you have relationships with the local schools for field trips and stuff like that?
We do, not as many as we would like, you know, so we're pretty limited capacity, but the marshes are here and the park is built to host kids and school groups and stuff. So part of why we're here today is to get the word out about the resource that's here. So let's take a 10-minute break to if you're here and you want to eat, move around, use the bathroom. And for the folks online, I'm sorry we didn't get to all of your questions. I will look at them and maybe bother Mary about some of them and try to get back to everyone. And then also we failed if you were here last week, but we have a couple questions that I was going to try to post online, and please, if you could take a couple minutes and answer them for us, that would be super helpful. And then in person, we're going to kind of like combine our break, chatting and having hot cocoa with giving us some feedback. We have some questions that we're asking folks to think about, and you can write your own answer to them. If you see an answer from one of our previous programs or that someone else just put down, put a sticker if you see a good idea. And so we're using it to help inform our programming. So if you're like, well, you really need to have more field trips, and you wanna make a note of that for us, remind us, feel free to put that down. So we're gonna do that for 10 minutes in here. It's super crowded, which is I think just speaks to how many people want to do this work that we're talking about, taking better care of our shoreline and community. So thank you all.
Two things. We are going to email you all next week with the 3 links of the recordings and a survey for you to, if you have time to answer to us. It's good for us to improve for next initiatives. And we are going to have a tour after 10-minute break. So
yeah, so don't go anywhere. We're going to have a walk and go check out the sites we're talking about. And then in May, we're going to be doing more outdoor activities. Part of this conversation was to help us figure out what folks wanted to do. So we're going to keep an eye out for upcoming Sherman Creek Stewards is what we're calling the program.
And there are some marsh-themed valentines over there on the table if you want some of them.
Most importantly, write up marsh-themed valentines.
thank you all online. We're finishing this now.